Hello everyone, this is James O'Keefe from Project Veritas. We have some breaking news on this New York Times investigation. We got two more reactions from the New York Times. One last night, one this morning from executive editor Dean Baquet. So I'm going to play some of his comments and then break down what it means. Really interesting developments.
I have a lot of thoughts about this. For those of you who saw it, it was an undercover operation in which James O'Keefe, who I think is a despicable person who runs a despicable operation, he essentially tries to catch people from what he sees as the left-wing media saying inappropriate things. He caught a kid, a guy in his 20s, who to give you an idea, they portray him as a very powerful figure in the New York Times. I'd never met him.
When did he start?
Started 6 months ago. And he has a very entry-level job at the New York Times. And he said things he shouldn't have said. And he said things that, were damaging, and I will deal with that. But the greater sin wasn't his, it was theirs. They sent a young woman in as part of their undercover operation, who essentially made him think that he was developing a friendship. He said really stupid stuff. He said he was Jim Comey's godson. He said he had once worked undercover. Essentially, he said stuff he shouldn't have said. But his sin was a sin of foolishness, and it violated our policies. Their sin was greater. Their sin was a sin of lying and subterfuge, and they're just awful.
For a purpose,
For a purpose,
So lots to unpack here. You can tell a man's virtues by his adversaries and his vices by his friends. I think I can speak on behalf of everyone at Project Veritas that we can sleep really well at night knowing the executive editor of the New York Times thinks that we are despicable and I am despicable.
James O'Keefe, who I think is a despicable person.
We don't know why the executive editor of the New York Times doesn't like us. He should be thanking us because we helped clean up his shop. We exposed stuff that in his words were stupid, foolish, and damaging. He said he was going to have to deal with it twice.
And he said things he shouldn't have said. He said really stupid stuff. And he said things that, were damaging. And I will deal with that. And I'll deal with that.
Now, what's really interesting about this tape is the point about deception.
Their sin was greater. Their sin was a sin of lying and subterfuge, and they're just awful.
For a purpose,
For a purpose,
Now, here's what's interesting. Their deception is to the people. Our deception is to gain access to certain subjects so we can tell the truth about them to the American people. In other words, we deceive our targets. They deceive their audience. That's a key distinction the executive editor doesn't understand. But you see this deception when you see the actual undercover tape about Nick Dudick, which the executive editor should be thanking us for exposing, because Nick Dudick brags about how he covers issues unfairly. He brags about his bias when he broadcasts that bias to the American people.
And you're going to be helping with the Times, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
I will be objective.
Yeah.
That's why I'm there. I will be objective.
Yeah.
That's why I'm there.
Where was this outrage from Dean Baquet about these sins when the New York Times did a piece called Undercover with the Alt-Right? This was last month. That talked all about the shocking revelations that the hidden camera and false pretenses revealed. As you know, undercover journalism is not a new technique. It dates back to the 1960s and 1970s when many newspaper reporters were awarded Pulitzer Prizes for doing things far more extreme than we have done. Some, in fact, purchased a bar, posed as bartenders, and using hidden cameras, filmed local graft and corruption. Again, this is not a new technique. Now, this is a profound change for us. Normally, they'd call us names. Normally, they'd call us criminals, or they'd ignore what we do. There was a reaction earlier this week. The deputy managing editor did say they're reviewing the situation, that there was a violation of the ethics policy. But this morning, there was another reaction by the executive editor. Check this headline, Social Media Guidelines for the Times Newsroom. And they said they're engaging responsibly on social media. They're needing to update and expand social media policies. He tells all of the editors to read them closely and take them to heart. And these bullet points include, in social media posts, our journalists must not express partisan opinions, promote political views, endorse candidates, make offensive comments, or do anything that undercuts the Times' journalistic reputation. It says the journalist should be especially mindful of appearing to take sides on issues that the Times is seeking to cover objectively. And it says that these guidelines apply to everyone in every department of the newsroom. What I'll say about these two reactions is that they're just not enough. Remember, our investigation is ongoing. We still have people inside their newsroom. The American Pravda investigation about the New York Times is ultimately about their culture, what they do and what they say and what they believe, how that impacts their news coverage in the deception towards their audience. A lot of people say, James, what's next? All I can say is I love their reactions. I love it when a plan comes together. What do I mean by that? Stay tuned.